Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. A pleasure to follow the Honourable Member Aberafon, and I congratulate the Honourable Lady for Swansea East, who is well respected on all sides of the House, for securing the debate and opening it wonderfully. Disappointing, though, that the hair isn't red, white and green just for today, but we do like a purple. Yesterday morning, Mr Deputy Speaker, we went to New Palace Yard with Mr Speaker, some dignitaries and some fantastic children in full traditional attire to see the raising of the Welsh flag above Parliament. The children sang a beautiful song about Dewi Sant, presented Mr Speaker with some lovely daffodils, and those who knew the words sung the national anthem. Before taking any pictures, my assistant said to me, "You don't have a daffodil like everybody else." In quite a cliched response, I said, "I don't need one." I said, "I've got my Welsh pride with me in my heart every day." I said, "Everywhere I go, don't need to wear a flower to show it to everybody else." A bit tongue-in-cheek, Mr Deputy Speaker, but that's how I and so many people actually across the length and breadth of Wales really feel about our country. The feeling of Welsh patriotism is often, strangely, a little bit more like a religion. Such is the depth of feeling of a Welsh person for their country. Everyone knows it. Even in these challenging sporting times in Wales, you won't hear a more stirring national anthem anywhere in the world than 70,000 Welsh rugby fans blasting the roof off the Principality Stadium. But it's the words of the rarely heard second verse of the anthem that I personally find the most enjoyable, and if the Chair will indulge me just this once a year, the verse goes: Hen Gymru fynyddig parad dwys y bardd, pob dyffryn, pob clogwyn, im golwg sydd hardd. Trwy deimlad gladgarol, mor swynol yw si, ein nentydd afonydd I mi. And for the benefit of those who don't know the verse, the translation is Old Land of the Mountains, Paradise of the Poets. Every valley, every cliff a beauty guards. Through love of my country, enchanting voices will be her streams and rivers to me. It speaks volumes, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the country itself and the way in which the country is regarded by the people. In preparation for this debate, I told my constituents on social media that it was coming a little while back and asked them for suggestions about what they would say themselves, or indeed what they would like me to say regarding life in Wales and how things are run. I'm going to touch on a number of those themes now, only partly apologising for getting a little bit more political for the remainder of my time, Mr Deputy Speaker, but as the Honourable Lady said in her opening, we're here to represent the views of our constituents. Catherine had a lot of things to bring up about life in Wales. She wanted to talk about travel and roads, about the NHS, about the disparity in local authority funding and the north-south divide. Dave asked about dentistry. Julie, a pharmacy worker, also wanted to ask about the NHS and why there's no uniformity between systems and records. More about that later on. Kyle also asked about roads and public transport. Billy with more about the NHS. Paul asked about a new train station. And finally, Len made a point about devolution generally that I'll save right for the very end. And Quentin helpfully asked, why is it that male voice choirs always sound so good? Which is a fair question, but will remain one of life's unexplained mysteries, as true as it is. The predominant issue, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, that keeps coming up in the responses from my constituents and from the many emails and letters I receive asking for help on a weekly basis is all around health and social care. I was here, in this very spot, exactly a week ago to participate in a debate on the future of the NHS called by the Honourable Lady, the member for Jarrow. Opposition members lined up to take shots at the UK government for their mismanagement of the NHS, one after another. To their feet they rose, saying that Labour had a plan for the NHS. I was delighted to hear it. I intervened a couple of times to commend them for having a plan and asked if they could please share it with their colleague, the Labour Health Minister, who didn't seem to have one at all. In North Wales, the Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board was put back into special measures earlier this week, and the whole management board relieved of their positions, with an interim chair and board put in place until a new one is found. This was the action of the Welsh Minister, to remove the board, which seemed to be the only body even trying to hold the failing executive to account, whilst leaving the executive and senior management team, who have presided over a decade of failure, in place to carry on. And it has been, sadly, a decade of failure at least. The North Wales Health Board has been in special measures for about 8 years, or at least it was, until about a few weeks before the last Senedd election, when it was announced with great fanfare that it was no longer in special measures. The political opportunism was astonishing. as Labour once again in Wales, in an attempt to win votes, put winning votes as a higher priority than the health of the people of North Wales. Nothing had changed. Nothing's changed now. Back into special measures it goes. It doesn't mean anything. It's been like that for ages and still nothing changes. Nothing changes, including the Welsh Health Minister. If this level of disastrous oversight of health services in North Wales was happening in England, His Majesty's loyal opposition would be calling for the resignation of the Secretary of State and his entire ministerial team. But it's okay. It's just North Wales. It's just North Wales, where only 62% of NHS buildings are operationally safe to use. In England, 1 in 20 people on waiting lists have been waiting more than a year, just 5%. In Wales, that's 1 in 4, 25%. The health service in Wales performs worse in virtually every measurable area than the equivalent in England. Currently, 51% of red call patients are responded to within 8 minutes, the second longest ambulance wait time ever. Only 23% of amber calls, which include heart attacks and strokes, were reached within 30 minutes. Where's their outrage? Where are the demands for better? Instead, the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Member for Holborn and St Pancras, in his speech last year said that Welsh Government is providing, and I quote, a blueprint for what Labour can do across the UK. You couldn't make it up, Mr Deputy Speaker. But as I said in this NHS speech last week, none of these statistics actually help. Whilst we as politicians in this place and outside when we're in the media spend all our time pointing fingers and trying to apportion blame, we never get to the actual issues. The NHS is failing in all parts of the United Kingdom under 3 different ruling parties. It's not a political problem, it's a structural one. And the more we spend our time finding someone to blame and making foolish points that shut down any prospect of a sensible debate, like you just want to privatise everything, then the lower is the chance of any positive change that makes real difference in the outcomes for people. As I mentioned earlier, Julie asked about uniformity of records and systems. It's ridiculous that if I had an accident or medical situation on holiday in Cornwall or Inverness, the medical professions there wouldn't be able to access my records because they're on NHS Wales systems. This kind of enforced division is so harmful to the cohesion of our United Kingdom and our sense of community. We've just spent years on the issue that, thankfully, hopefully, the Prime Minister seems to have finally solved. An issue which annexed and divided one part of the UK from the rest, but in so many small ways we segregate and divide ourselves on an ever-increasing basis from each other, and it's such a shame. I had an email this morning from a local reporter saying that they were running a story on the lack of availability of housing in Flintshire. Would I like to comment? Sad fact is that over the past 3 years, the average constituency across the UK has had 665 new homes built. In Delhi, that's just 276, around 40% of the average. We have a huge lack of social housing, people waiting for years on the list in hope of a property coming available, with virtually none being built. But I can't lay the blame at the door of Flintshire Council, Mr Deputy Speaker, as Flintshire receives the 20th highest funding settlement out of 22 local authorities in Wales every year, certainly.
Would he applaud Flintshire Council for actually building council houses, which we actually need more of?
Absolutely. As I say, I can't blame Flintshire Council for it at all. They do what they can with the meagre resources that they get from Welsh Government. I completely agree with my constituency neighbour. I completely agree. But unfortunately, well, as the Shadow Secretary shouts across the room, it's nothing to do with the Treasury benches. I'm talking about the division of how the money is divided up by Welsh Government and how it's given to the different authorities. 20th out of 22 local authorities in Wales every year. Certainly.
I mean, clearly that wasn't the case this year, was it? So would he put the record straight on that?
This year, on a per capita basis, Flintshire was 20th out of 22 for funding, as was recently stated by the Chief Executive of Flintshire Council. There's absolutely no denying it whatsoever. So council tax, certainly.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way. He was making an interesting point earlier about structural challenges, and the NHS has now moved on to local authorities. Does he think that for a nation of 3.3 million people, 22 local authorities is too many?
Well, I think arguably it is when you consider also the number of representatives that we have in terms of elected representatives, and wanting to expand that even further. London, as a good example, has 10 million people and significantly fewer elected representatives and significantly fewer decision-making bodies. I completely agree. 22 is far too many, and particularly going back to talking about the health board that we did earlier on, one health board that covers the whole huge geographical area and diversity of North Wales seems to be sadly too few. In bizarre contrast. But yeah, Flintshire is so poorly funded by the Welsh Government. In order to maintain services, council tax in my constituency has gone up around 30% in the past couple of years. Bearing in mind that my constituency also has around 25% more over 65s and the elderly than the national average, it's a huge problem for a constituency that already has some parts in the top 10% of the most deprived areas in Wales. Other local authorities are in the top 5 for funding every year, despite having dozens of millions of pounds in unallocated reserves. And it will come as a surprise to absolutely nobody in the north that 4 out of the top 5 local authorities for funding every year are in the south. If Flintshire was simply given the average funding, if it was just levelled out and distributed in a fairer way, it would mean an additional £20 million a year into Flintshire, and my constituents wouldn't need to see reduced services at an ever-increasing cost. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to talk a little bit about transport. Recently, the Welsh Government announced that it was scrapping the majority of its road building projects, the majority of which were cancelled because of the attempt to get people out of cars and into other modes of transport. As parliamentarians, we spend a lot of time in London and can recognise that public transport is better than cars in so many instances, but that's London, where there's approaching 10 million people in a small area. In North Wales, we've got about 750,000 people spread across a huge geography of coastal and mountainous terrain. There's no prospect for people to realistically be able to abandon their cars and use public transport, even if it was good, but unfortunately public transport facilities across North Wales are terrible. Trains and buses run sporadically, and when they do, they're rarely on time. It's simply not feasible. So to hear that the people of North Wales are also being told that they should switch to alternative modes of travel, that they should submit to the increasingly pervasive active travel solution, which asks pensioners to walk up steep hills in Dellins towns in the name of reducing emissions, is ludicrous. This roads policy, as well as the Welsh Government's ridiculous move to change the speed limit from 30 down to 20, which comes in September, is nothing short of an attack on car users, not caring that car use in North Wales is absolutely crucial. Just another way that the Welsh Government, along with things like the tourism tax and falling educational standards, is systematically destroying the country that many of us love so dearly. In closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I come back to the comment made by one of my respondents on social media regarding devolution. For us in North Wales, it doesn't work. It's a failed 25-year-long experiment that has delivered absolutely nothing for the people of North Wales. And now they want to expand it even further at the cost of another £100 million. It's my abiding wish that I'm sure will never come to fruition that the UK government looks at what's happening in North Wales, puts aside the seeming political position of devolve and forget, and does something to help us by bringing forward measures to test the will of the Welsh people once again as to whether they want to continue with this failed experiment at all. Next May 2024 will be the 25th anniversary of the establishment of the Senedd. I live in hope, Mr Deputy Speaker, that 2049 will be the 25th anniversary of its abolition.